Well, welcome once again to Calaveras Living. Now, on today's program, we're going to talk about the business of being a funeral director, running a mortuary or memorial chapel, and we're going to talk with a man who's very experienced, more than 30 years experience, so we'll get a lot of stories and learn about new regulations and maybe the sociological changes and economic changes that influence the whole business. So Glen Moore is with us, and he's the funeral director at San Andreas Memorial Chapel. And Glen, it's good to see you.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming too. And I guess the business of running a funeral home or mortuary or whatever you want to call it, a memorial chapel, takes a lot of talents.
Yeah, it does. It takes a lot of fortitude, I guess you could say, and a lot of compassion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that get into the business but fall by the wayside, get out of it because they can't handle the stress or can't separate themselves a little bit from the families and get caught up too much emotionally with the families.
So
yeah.
that is a challenge, huh?
That is a challenge, yes.
Well, now you do have more than 30 years experience, huh?
Oh, yeah, right around 30 years, yeah.
And you have a number of duties at the Memorial Chapel?
Yeah, with a small community up here, we do quite a bit of different stuff. We make the removals, we meet with the families. I'm also a licensed embalmer, and we have other licensed embalmers in between us and Angels Camp, which is owned by the same company. And then we work the services and stuff like that. So, and clean the mortuary and that kind of stuff.
So you're kind of a jack of all trades, but all of them seemingly responsible things. I mean, things where you really have to be sensitive to what's going on besides doing the routine things or things that you're trained to do.
Right.
You know, and this might not be the way to start an interview, but embalming, which is kind of the old style, more people used to have, people who passed away have them embalmed, right?
Right, right.
Whereas today, are there more cremations, or what's the balance?
Yeah, there has been a big swing, especially within the economy. When the economy hit, most people that I talked to or that talked to me says, well, you guys won't be hit by the economy, but then actually we have been, because more people are doing cremation than burial. And so we have less embalmed viewing, people being embalmed and put in the casket and have a regular full day of viewing, and then the service. It's more of do the cremation and then have a memorial service at a church or even at our mortuary, but it's more memorial services.
So not only is embalming the whole procedure more costly for the family than cremation, it's also less profit for the funeral home, right?
Right, right. Because of the situation. It's not that we have that big of a markup, but when you sell more things, it's a better income for the mortuary.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we're going to downgrade somebody who picks cremation, because our company is all about having the family feeling comfortable with what they've chosen, having all the options. We went from at one point having 5 or 6 urns for showing to 15 to 20, so that families would have more option to buy what they like.
So more of a choice. More
of a choice, right.
Okay.
So that they can feel comfortable, so that and really our philosophy is when the service is over with, the families go home after everything's done, after the reception's done, they can sit down on their couch, can look at each other and say, we chose everything right, and that we have no regrets.
Well, that's the way they wanted it. That's the way they got it.
Right.
Okay. What's the biggest challenge in dealing with families? Are they, I would imagine they go from some people unfortunately being indifferent and other people being totally emotionally involved and bereaved.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Over time, you learn how to read people just by making certain phrases that you say and see how they react from it, or how they're reacting within each other. And so there are some families that'll come in, the loved one has been sick for a very long time, and finally they've got that relief. You know, they've been in long-term care and just going downhill, and finally they have the relief, and so they'll laugh a little bit. And one of the greatest things for the relieving of that stress of losing a loved one is laughter. And is to joke with each other. And then you start, especially in the time that we talk about the obituary, to put in the newspaper, the families start talking about the fun things, and then they start laughing about it. A good story that, hey, you know, Dad fell out of the boat one time when he was fishing, you know.
And Mom says, yay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, you have to be really careful about, I mean, when you say laughter is good, and we all know that laughter is good in any aspect of life, but you have to be very careful and kind of sense what's happening with the people.
Oh yeah, you can be empathetic, and you can steer it so that families are comfortable and keep them on track to get the information and stuff like that, so they're not there at the mortuary for 2 or 3 hours.
Okay, yeah, because that can be draining.
It can be draining, exactly.
Now, you don't recall way back when you were first starting out, the first few families you had to deal with, was it like going to a person's home to sell insurance? You know, you kind of
I started quite a bit, and you know, excuse me, I'm just learning this, and one of the good things that we do when we're training somebody, like we have ROP students from the high school. That we had one in Angels Camp.
What kind of student?
ROP.
What is the
Regional Occupational Program.
Okay.
Calaveras High School has a great program that gets kids out, especially the seniors, into the various areas of the medical field and in the funeral industry and in the veterinarian area. And the kids come in for a couple, 2 or 3 hours, and then they work within that environment of what they're interested in.
Wow.
And so what we've done in training the ROP students is that we have them set in on an arrangement. We okay it with the families, and if the family's okay, then the ROP student will just put a chair like in the doorway and just sit there and listen to us on how we deal with the families and how we do it. That's the way I was taught.
Oh, that's good.
And when I walked in, and then it's always you still stutter even though you've sat in on 2 or 3 of them until you're there by yourself, and okay, here we go.
Sure, your confidence has to build, and your sense of maturity too. I mean, you're thinking when you go back, you know, 30-something years. I mean, you were a young fellow.
Oh yeah, when I first started the business, I was about 23, 24 years old.
Yeah.
And
what's the most important, you think, in dealing with families? The sense that you give them about your duties, you as a person, and the Memorial Chapel as a business.
To really make them feel that family, the one family that we are dealing with, is the most important.
Okay.
And when they feel that they're important, they're going to feel comfortable, and they're going to feel like they can ask any question that they need to ask. Okay. And they'll get the answers and feel good about it. Because more times than not, we have all heard, and we've all been to funeral homes, that the funeral director, and this is my own term, act like used car salesmen.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, I had a guy that I knew in a mortuary down in the valley that we were talking, and this was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, I like to have all of my services be $5,000. And I went, well, what if a family can't afford that? Sure. He goes, that's why you guys, we just send them to you guys because they're cheaper. He goes, I won't sell a family less than $5,000 for a funeral.
Wow, what a bad attitude.
It was a very bad attitude. And I says, what about the care for the families? He says, I care for the families, but I also need to feed my family. And I'm saying, not like that, you don't.
Oh,
you know, and so we, as Calaveras Mortuaries is what we're under, but it's Angels Memorial Chapel and San Andreas Memorial Chapel. We say we want to make the families feel at home when they walk in and when they leave, and that they know that the person that they're talking to, they can count on.
Good, and that you're not trying to oversell them or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Usually what we do, if a family goes into the showroom, we have our show, we remodeled, and we have our caskets and our urns in the same room. When they go in to look at the caskets or the urns, we walk out. And we give them some time by themselves so that they can feel that the family can talk together, see what they like. I give them 2 or 3 minutes, walk back in. Any questions? You need a little more time? Then we just walk back out again. And then when they're ready.
Is that kind of a policy of the business? I mean,
it is. Yeah.
Your company.
Yeah.
That's good. Now, I know for the people out there, you know, as you say, if somebody's been in a nursing home or they've been sick, you kind of expect, or if they're very elderly and not doing well, then it's not unexpected. But many times there's an accident or illness that takes somebody quickly or at a younger
suicide,
age.
Homicide, all that.
Yeah.
The stress level is much higher in that respect. So you just have to you have to be more empathetic with the family, and to be able just to sit down with them. And sometimes it's just a matter of sitting at the desk and letting them grieve. And we tell everybody we've got stock in Kleenex because we have extra Kleenex on the desk, and if they use the whole box, it's not a problem. They need it, and we give them time. We give them time to grieve. And
well, that previous guy you're talking about would charge $500 for the box of Kleenex.
He would, yeah, most definitely.
Okay. Now, can you give the folks out there an idea of how much? I know there's no real typical funeral or typical process, but kind of the general range of a funeral that's done at the chapel, one that's done at a church, one where the deceased is embalmed, and one where he or she is cremated.
Yeah,
I know that's asking a lot.
No, that's okay, because generally our price for going to a church for a service and having a service at the mortuary is the same.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's
we don't
good.
charge any extra to go out of the office.
Even though it's a distance? Sometimes?
Even though it's a distance.
Yeah.
The only thing that we would travel, if it's like down to Sacramento, then we have a transportation fee that we do because it costs us gas.
Sure.
To go down there. Basically, for us, a direct cremation, which is bottom line, no memorial service. There's no memorial, or they may do a memorial service on their own type of thing, but just for a direct cremation that comes with a plastic urn is $1,258.25. And the only thing that doesn't include is death certificates. For right now, they get from the county, they're $16 a piece, and we don't add that in because some families need one, some families need 10. And so,
usually the more you get, the better, because it seems like months later somebody's asking for a death certificate.
One of the nice things about our county is the fact that if a family gets 4 now, and then 6 weeks down the road they're going to need another 3 or 4, they can go right down to the recorder's office, fill out an application, and they'll get them right there on the spot at the same price.
That's good enough.
We do not add any price onto the death certificates.
Yeah.
That's a straight county fee. To go with a funeral, what we call a complete funeral, with embalming, viewing, casket, and going to the cemetery, you can probably spend $6,000.
Okay.
You can, if you really want to go high, you can. We've got a casket in there that's $4,500 by itself.
Just by itself.
But that's for people that want to go that way. They've got the money and they want to do that, and we've had that.
Yeah.
But generally you can figure, and that includes the opening and closing of the grave, the cost of the grave, depending on what cemetery you go to.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, it's $5,000 to $6,000.
I thought that charge would come from the cemetery itself.
Well, that's what I'm saying is it's included in it, but I'm just adding it in. They would pay the cemetery for the grave, but the opening and closing, we have none of the cemeteries up here have their own grave digger, so we have a contract with a grave digger out of Sonora that digs the graves.
Okay.
And so all we got to do is call him up and tell him, ask him if he's available for a certain time for a grave, and he'll say yay or nay. And then if it's not, then we have to change the time an hour or 2. But other than that, he's ready to. And he goes in usually 2 or 3 days ahead of time to dig the graves.
Wow. Now, in your opinion, having the experience you have of, I guess, hundreds or maybe thousands of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In fact, you said years ago you had something more than 600.
The year that I left Allen Mortuary in Turlock, in 2003, when I moved up here, we did 680 services in 1 year, in 12 months, one mortuary, and we had a staff of about 10 of us, but we were all still running pretty busy, no days off. And
but now you, as a funeral director here, I mean, you're pretty busy also.
Yeah,
right?
we do. We did about 100, almost 200 services last year for our mortuary. Angels Camp did about the same. And now
your duties, I mean, involve quite a bit. I mean, as you say, you do some of the embalming or all of it?
I do most of the embalming for San Andreas because I'm there all the time. What's kind of nice about having Angels Camp as part of the team, part of the company, is like on a Wednesday when I'm off, then one of the guys from Angels Camp comes over and covers for me. Okay. And then I have I have a funeral assistant, Krista Sutton, who works with me, and she's there most of the time. So she's there. So one of us is always there from San Andreas, and then when there's one of us gone, then we have somebody from Angels Camp comes over.
How long does a typical embalming procedure take?
From an hour to 2 hours.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on how that person's body is, if there's different things happen. That
Well,
make
certainly
it
there
longer.
could be injuries
Sure.
for accidents or...
Right, and with accidents and homicides, unattended deaths, where they don't have a doctor, then we do an autopsy.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't have a coroner's office in Calaveras County, the pathologist comes to either one of the mortuaries, and then they do it there, and then we assist with it.
Now, are you an assistant coroner?
Yeah, I'm a deputy coroner.
Okay.
And so we go out on those calls too. All the employees, Kevin Raggio, who's the designated manager for both mortuaries, he's also the elected coroner. And so when you come to work for either Angels Camp or San Andreas, you get deputized as a deputy coroner.
Oh, okay.
It's automatic. And
Now, is there considerable paperwork that you have to do for the families? I mean, what do you have to do? How many papers?
Well, for a cremation, you're talking probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 pieces of paper to sign.
For the state?
For the state, right.
Okay.
And then if you're going to do burial with a full burial, you're only talking about 3 or 4 pieces of paper. And the reason why the state has more paperwork for the cremation is because the things that have happened in the past, where we've had, cremains stored and not scattered like they were supposed to be, and kept at mortuaries where they shouldn't have been stored, and that kind of thing. So the state's gotten tighter on the cremations as far as the paperwork goes, so it can be traced better. And kind of the neat thing that's happened with, and I've had this question quite a few times from families about the cremation is how do I know I'm getting my loved one?
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask
yeah.
that. In fact, I worried that about my parents. I said, how do I know that?
Yeah, the cool thing is that every crematory has a set of numbers, and they have a little metal disc, and each person that comes into the crematory is assigned a number, and that number stays with that, remains. From the going into the crematory, it's stamped on all the paperwork, on the permit, on the cremation authorization forms, on the release. When we have a form that we sign when we take it to the crematory, which now we have our own crematory. We opened up our own crematory in Jamestown back in October, and so it's kind of cool because then families know it's being done locally and by us, and we can vouch. Yeah, and they know us. And then with that number is put on the urn. And it's also put on the permit for disposition that's in an envelope. The number is on the envelope, and then it's taped on the cremation box. And so it's just, we can guarantee 100% that,
good to know.
If your dad, when your dad died, and if we took care of him, I could guarantee when you got him back, it was your dad.
Okay, and there would be no mixing of ashes from
Absolutely
previous.
not.
How's the crematory is totally cleaned out before?
It is completely cleaned out, and it is swept into a container, and then that container is taken out of the crematory because it's down below the lower part of the crematory, and then it's brought out and set aside to cool, and then it has the paperwork is. Paper is clipped to it, right with it. It stays. The paperwork stays with it all the time, and then the processing machine that we have, it processes it in such a way that it even has a magnet that takes out any metal, and then puts all the cremains automatically puts all the cremains into a cremation bag, and then into the plastic urn.
You know, I kind of hate to bring this up, but you hear some horror stories every once in a while in the newspaper or on television of some crematory or some funeral home that they don't act by the rules, and they act very immorally, and they might steal gold out of teeth or something. How do you prevent anything like that?
We document everything. It's all documented, and realistically, I've been told by a dentist many years ago that the amount of gold that would make it worth anything, you would have to have 400 to 500 teeth to get less than 1 ounce.
Oh, is that true?
Right. It's more of a compound. The gold is mainly only used for coloring, not for strength, because gold is so soft. People wouldn't even be able to chew because the gold would be so soft.
Well, I think that's kind of reassuring to people then, because
Yeah.
I think they hear these stories, or you read them in the paper, you think, you know, who's running this? What kind of people are they?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what are the rules about spreading ashes in this county or state?
If you're going to, in the state, for scattering cremains, you have to get the governing authority or the property's owner to scatter it on private property, or on, like, for instance, we had when I used to work in Turlock, we had a lot of people that used to love to go to Yosemite. You know, hour and a half,
Sure.
2-hour drive.
Yeah.
And so they would want to spend, their loved one would say, when I die, say my dad said, hey, I want to be scattered in Yosemite.
Yeah.
And the families would contact the ranger station, and then the ranger station would send them a letter and say, these are the points in Yosemite where you can scatter.
Oh, where it's permissible.
Where it's permissible, right. In Calaveras County and Amador County, there is no land, you can't scatter it over the mountains, because there is no land that's considered wilderness land, where there is, or what they call unpopulated land.
Yeah.
Because there's always campers, and even on some of the back trails.
Well, you hear people flying out of the airport and doing it from an airplane, but that's not legal?
You have to do it in an area where it is legal. You can do it in Nevada, but you can't do it in Northern California, because there is no unpopulated. That's the way the state says it.
Okay.
If they do it, we don't know about it.
Yeah.
You know, basically, and so we don't tell anybody that they can do that, but that's what the state says. The state says we can't do it, so that's what we tell the families.
Okay. And of course, some people actually just keep their urn and keep the ashes.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Yeah. I know a lady in Arizona who's kept her husband that way, and that's the way she
and
wanted.
we've had families that mom or dad died, or mom died, and they bought a double urn, or they bought one urn, and then when the other spouse died, they come back in and they buy a double urn and have them both together in one urn.
Oh, that's
And they make urns that are big enough. Some of them have like 2 chambers in them, but it looks like, but it's made into one urn, but 2 chambers, and that way they can have both mom and dad together.
Oh, that's good. In your opinion, and I don't know if this is the right word, but what is the more dignified way, do you think, to treat your family members? Having them embalmed and unfortunately going through the decay process, or having them cremated? You
know, that really depends on each family, because each family has a different view. If you go back east, they're still doing probably 80 to 90% embalmings and funerals and ground burials. In California, it's probably over 50% in California that's doing cremations. And really, it's not about me to call the shots on what's good for a family.
Yeah.
It's about what that family wants.
What would you do with your family members?
My mom and dad had thought originally to be cremated, and when we lost my youngest brother, he was over in Germany in the Army, and when he was brought back to Colorado, I grew up in Colorado, and they buried him, and then they bought 2 plots next to him, and they're going to be buried. For my wife and I, we're going to be buried. May not be embalmed, but we'll probably be buried. We'll be buried down in Oakdale. That's where her family's from. And so we'll be down there. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, my brother-in-law has talked about being cremated, and his wife have talked about being cremated, and that's fine, because that's their choice. And the dignity comes from doing what your loved one wants, not from what you think they want. And so it's really kind of good for a family in that respect, for somebody as they get older to at least go to a mortuary and get some paperwork that they can fill out. We have a pre-arrangement form that we've come up with, and the families, it doesn't cost any money. They can come in and get it. They can call me and we can mail it to them, and it'll work. And it has information for the death certificate and information for newspaper notices and what you'd like to have. And you can have that in a file. You can get that in the mail from either us or Angels Camp. And then if you move out of the area, that's going to be used by any mortuary. It's a generic form. It just has our mortuaries on it because it's come from us. But then the families, your family will know what you want.
Okay, but you highly recommend to prepare ahead if you can.
Prepare ahead if you can. And we have, if you want to pay for it, we have two ways, either trust or funeral insurance. And that way it locks it in. If you pay it in full, it locks it in. You don't even have to worry about inflation of cost, because the insurance and the trust account draws enough interest to cover any kind of inflation.
Okay, going back to the cost that you mentioned about embalming or total complete funerals or not, can those be paid off in time, or do they have to be paid at one time?
When the person passes away, unfortunately, it has to be paid before we cremate or before we do the service,
okay.
before we put them in the casket.
Okay.
We've just had just too many people skip out on us, believe it or not, and it's forced us to have to do that.
Well, they know you can't get it from the deceased.
Exactly. Yeah. How can you? And by law, we can't hold a body for payment. It's against the law.
Okay. Now, probably in your business, you've heard all the bad jokes and everything like that. But I mean, in some ways, to do well in your business, you have to have that warmth and that dignity and the respect for the family. But you have to have a little sense of humor.
Oh yeah, you have to have a sense of humor.
Or it could get depressing.
Yeah, it was even the ministers have sense of humor. I had a service one time with a minister, and we were walking over to the grave, and it was a little ways over. It was a pretty good size cemetery. And he just kind of leans over to me. He says, "You know, this would make a pretty nice golf course if it wasn't for all these headstones."
Well, so you could probably write a joke book about this. Now, just in closing, Glenn, and I really appreciate you coming to and talking about this, because some people don't talk about it enough.
Sure.
Anything that we haven't covered that you think would be of interest to viewers?
I just think that it would be good for families to at least talk about. You know, my grandfather was dying of emphysema, and she would not talk to a funeral home. We knew what funeral home she was going to work with, but she wouldn't go down and talk to him, wouldn't talk to the rest of the family, because I don't know what she was thinking, but she didn't talk about it until he passed away. And so I really kind of recommend for all families to sit down. And it's a morbid thing to talk about, and it's a scary thing to talk about. But it's a good thing to talk about. If nothing else, talk about, hey, I want to be cremated. You know, whenever I die, I want to be cremated. You know.
Do the families who have some religious propensities, are they easier to deal with than those people, say, who are atheists or have no beliefs, or is there pretty much no difference?
There is a difference between those who have a religious background, because they have a hope of getting to see them again. And if you don't mind, I'm going to just use a scripture that Jesus talked about, or that Paul talked about, or Jesus said that we grieve, but not as those who have no hope. And I've seen services that were done by a secular group, and they just talk about a hope. And that maybe
they don't really hope.
But they don't. Will we get to see him again? You know, we'll leave it in the hands of the guy in the sky, and God knows everything, and He's all compassion. But those of religious persuasion says we know that we will see him again.
So it's more security.
It's more security, and so it doesn't mean that we don't grieve or that they don't grieve. But it does mean that we do have a hope.
Okay, great. Well, that's a good way to end. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. I wish you well.
It's been a pleasure.
And I don't want to say, no, I don't want to joke, okay, because it's a serious subject, and really appreciate your attitude.
Thank you.
So I hope you join us next time on Calaveras Living.